Good day, folks. This is Shane Hastie for the InfoQ Engineering Culture Podcast. Today, I'm sitting down across many miles with Julien Danjou. Julien is the Chief Executive and founder of Mergify. Julien, I'll let you tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure, thank you. So I'm Julien. I'm 39 now. I'm getting older. I'm a software engineer. I started doing software engineering stuff 20 or 25 years ago now. And I started doing open source work. Basically, that was my first path to doing a lot of toying with computers. I started this way. I think for the last 20 years, I contributed to a lot of open source projects and worked in companies interested into open source. My last experience were working at Red Hat, Datadog, and then Mergify that I founded a few years ago.
We were chatting before we started recording about your experience working remotely in both remote first and hybrid environments. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? Some of the good points and the challenges.
Yeah, that's a very, very wild topic. The way it started for me when I started my career as a Debian developer. So the Linux distro like 20 years ago. I was still a student by then. And I joined the project as an engineer to help building Debian, all of that. And that's the first time I started to work with people that were around the globe. Basically, I was based in France and I was working with people in the US, in Australia, and wherever you want, basically, which I don't know, in my mind was a game changer. You were able to start building software with people not in the same office or classroom back then for me. But it was very weird, a weird feeling. And I started to discover working remotely with people this way, chatting over IRC, all of that. And then it drew to me when I started to work. And the first company I joined, even at Red Hat, Red Hat has this culture of coming right straight from open source, right? So everybody is used to work asynchronously, which is a very funny way of working. Like it's way different than general people are used to work. And you also work with people, same thing, Red Hat is global. So I was in France, there are people in the US, people in all over Europe. So it was really growing on me, this way of working when we started Mergify a few years ago. My co-founder was also at the other side of France to me. So we used to work together at Red Hat remotely, asynchronously, and we started the company this way. In that case of Mergify, we started that as a full remote company, but I used to work, for example, at Datadog, which is more hybrid, same for Red Hat. And all this kind of working method and environment are very challenging in different ways. For example, I'll start with the hybrid approach, where people are in the office or not in the office. So to me, the main challenge for that is how do you organize people and how do you not end up with what I call second-class citizen? Basically, it's very easy for people not being in the office to miss a lot of the water cooler chat. And we all know that a lot of things happen during those chats, basically. Maybe the coffee helps, but people talk and information is transmitted between people, very important information that you might miss. I think people are just lazy to type everything on a keyboard, which makes sense. We all like that. So you really communicate the minimum amounts of information over Slack, over Teams, whatever you use. Whereas if you just, you have to make conversation with somebody, you're just going to find topics and information to transmit, which is very important. And you don't do that when we are not in the office, basically. And if people are in the office, do that maybe every day because they like to go to the office every day, but not into I just go remote for a few days a week. And you have people on the other side of the spectrum, which are never at the office because they can't go, because whatever, they're very far. Then you have this kind of second-class citizen of people not getting the information that everyone knows. And I have this kind of anecdote, like when I started to work 15 years ago, I used to work in an office and I had to move very far for a few months. So I said to my boss, I'm just going to move out. And it was a very small company. We were like 12 people in the company. And I moved very far and I work remotely. I'm the only one being remote. And I live in this other city, a few miles from Paris. And one other guy from another company, which was a neighbor of our office, comes near my place and say, oh, do you want to have lunch? So we have lunch. And he said to me, oh, do you know, by the way, that you hired this person? And I was like, my company hired this person? So I was like, no, I don't know. He's been there for like a month. And nobody ever told me, like nobody sent an email saying, we hired this guy. No, there's no one new people in the office. And for a month, I didn't know because I was not in the office. It was obvious for everyone. So nobody thought about sending an email because it was like, the guy was in the office, right? And that culture was not doing remote, all of that. So, I mean, I don't blame them, but that's the kind of thing that you still find in hybrid places as far as I can see.
Hybrid is a challenge. What do we need to do to overcome some of those challenges? If we're stuck with hybrid, what do you think?
I think it's very hard for hybrid to work because of that. So there are people doing hybrid differently. For example, I know teams doing everybody goes to the office on Friday, or the opposite, like nobody goes on the office. So you have to have the same schedule. So people don't have a chance to miss all the record information being transmitted, and there's a chance for everyone to be in the same place. So that might work. There are the other aspects because you can also fix that, I think, with more process and like being more like always think about people not in the office. And then the percentage of people not being in the office that matters. Like if you have only 5% of the people not being in the office, you have this kind of problem where people are just ignored if they're not in the office. If you have only like, I don't know, 10, 20% of the people going into an office every day, then the culture can shift to being, okay, we're actually remote, but from time to time we have a place where we can go and hang out together. So the culture shifts a bit in the sense that you are more thinking about people not being there because you know that it's not the norm to be in the office. So that's where you have to draw the line. And I see people going hybrid with like just you can go, from time to time in remote work, like being in your home or whatever. And I think it makes very hard to go really into shifting the culture. It's also true if you start from that, we're just going to say there's a place where you can go work if you want from time to time, and people can sync up and say, okay, I'm going on the office on Monday, and then your culture can be asynchronous, can be remote. Whereas if you spend, which happened with the COVID thing, where people were used to work in the office and suddenly were like, okay, we're just going full remote, and then we go hybrid, and that's not your culture, right? So you're just mixing everything, and it's very hard to change a company culture from everybody is in the office. I don't need to send emails to transmit information. I'll have to think about people being there, or maybe I'll leave a note if I know somebody's on sick leave or whatever. But then it's hard to transition to like, no, I don't expect people to be right on the same time zone as me. I'm expecting people not to be there also. And you have to change the way you work basically entirely. And when you have a lot of history because your company is not a startup, I think it makes it harder to switch to that mode.
So when you founded Mergify, you did this with a very deliberate remote first. What are the challenges in working remote first, and how do you overcome them?
Right. So when you are full remote, the challenges are a bit different. So you don't have this kind of second-class citizen problem because everyone is on the same page. And I think it's very important, whatever your mode of working is, or at least that's my view, that everybody's on the same level of privilege. Like there's not people getting perks because they're going to the office and they got have parties and free snacks, and the other don't have anything. So you don't have this problem. Nobody got free snacks. So what's so? But then it's the real issue for that, which you can also find in a hybrid approach, is how do you connect people? So we are, I think, social animals. I'm a software engineer, like many people in that area. I'm more introvert, so I'm happy being alone for the whole day in my place. That's cool. But after a while, it drains you out. Like you feel disconnected from your work, from people. You don't talk to them. So Zoom and like calls are a solution to that, but it's not having a barbecue with people. And so it's very hard when you build a remote company to have this kind of connection with everyone. And you feel that worse when you go hybrid because you have connection with everyone you see every day or every couple of days in the office and not with the other people. So it's a very weird dynamic in your teams. If you have that, where you're full remote, everybody feels weird because everybody don't meet other people, right? So how do we solve that at Mergify? So I don't think there's a silver bullet. It really depends on the culture you want to build. It took us time. I think we started to build the team 2 years ago. So it took us time to find the right pace and the right thing. We are a team of 11 people right now. The way we solve that is that we basically hired only people in France, which was not a deliberate choice at the beginning, but we're based in France. It was more natural for us to find people in France, our network, all of that. So we realized that having everyone remote but in France was a chance, because obviously it makes it easier to hire people when you don't have to look for people in a certain place. So we were able to find a lot of talent everywhere. And then we decided to every quarter meet in the same place. So what we do is that every quarter, so every 3 months, we find a place in France, anywhere. It could be like a remote place in the country or near a mountain or whatever. We rent a house, a mansion, whatever we find. We run that for a week. So on Monday, everyone travels, take train, planes, car, whatever, go to that place. On Monday evening, we do like a small party, a barbecue, whatever, to just meet and drink beers. And sometimes we have people that just join the team and they work for a month or 2 months and they never met anyone face to face, which is very weird to work in a place where you never, shake the hand of anyone. So we can do that like on Monday, then we work, chat, whatever for the next 3 days. And from Friday, everybody gets back to their place. So we just take a train, car, whatever, and go back, which means we don't impact people on weekend or whatever to travel, which we don't want to do. We don't force people to come either. I have kids, people have kids, have a life. So if they can't come for a week, it's fine. So far, everybody, do the effort at least once or twice a year, most of the time, 4 times a year to come to that, which is very great because it allows everyone to feel connected to each other. And it gives you this kind of creativeness you need for a startup where everyone, really is fueled with that energy. And the next few weeks, there's this high energy of people being connected together and having this willingness to work together to build stuff. And then, it just dries out after a few weeks. So you have to restart this process. And that's why we do that every 3 months. So it's a trade-off because like I was saying, I have 2 kids. It makes it very hard for me to travel every week, and that's true for other people in the team. But I think good trade-off, like for 3 months, you don't have to commute to any place. You can stay home, save a lot of time and all the perks that you get with remote work. On the other side, a week every 3 months, you have to, move your ass somewhere.
So that intense period of bringing people together, you mentioned in that quite a lot of social interaction and deliberate social interaction. How much of that time is focused on work versus general social?
I think it changed over the last edition that we had. The last time we spent a whole afternoon, for example, we were near Bordeaux. So we spent a whole afternoon going to a winery and seeing grape of wine and already wine, all of that for a whole afternoon, just, to have fun, good excuse to drink wine, obviously. So we tend to focus more and more on less work. At the beginning, we were working too much, like for 3 days straight, just having conversation and working because we were very young and very have to do that to survive. We're still a startup, so we have to work a lot on different things. No, we are still in that area, but we're a larger team and it feels more important. I think we are growing and learning from that. So we understand that it's very, very more important to spend that work, people having fun together and building connections and trusting each other for the next. It's like short term versus long term, basically. Short term, you want to work, you want to spend time building stuff and have this kind of technical conversation or product conversation or marketing conversation, which we do have. But it's fine to not have. You can have conversation at overtime during the rest of the days of the time. Zoom is still there, right? So what you can't do the rest of the time, you need to do that. And visiting a winery, you can't do that over Zoom for sure, which would be not very fun. So let's just do that. So we do now focus more on that. We're not going to spend the 3 days not working, etc. But we do spend time just chatting together. It's very hard to chat with 10 people over Zoom. The more you are, it's easier to do that face to face. So having this large conversation, transmitting the idea, the vision of the company, the product, doing brainstorms, easier face to face with a glass of wine or anything to chat to all of that. So we really emphasize, I would say, that part now during our week meeting.
Thank you. Some interesting ideas there. Managing remote teams. You are a leader, and as you mentioned, you have been in the other side of that as well. You have been managed remotely. What are the challenges there?
I've been managed remotely for a few years before running Mergify. I think the pain point as being managed remotely is what I was saying, how do you feel connected to your teammates, or do you trust them, or do you understand them, who they are? When I was young, I was thinking that my job was to write software. And the more I grew, the more I understand that we were just a team trying to solve a problem. And the way we solve problem is by writing software. It's like a byproduct of who we are and what we do, but it's not necessarily the goal, the end goal. And to understand that and to do all of that, you have to feel connected to your teammates and to understand them. I'm not saying you have to be friends with everyone. That's not the goal, but there's a certain level of connection. You can't just ignore people and work alone. That's not what a team is. You can go very fast alone, but not very far. So you have to work with other people. So when you are managed, I think there are expectations from your management teams in terms of, for example, meetings. I spent a period of my time and for that where there was no budget for travel, for example. So we were not able to meet. I spent 2 years without any budget for travel. So I was not able to meet the other teammates. The culture was pre-COVID, so the culture was not a lot of Zoom and calls, so mostly IRC. It's very hard to work with people just talking with text for years and for months and years over IRC and feel connected to your work, etc. So being managed like that, it makes very hard. You can feel depressed. And that's one of the real problems. And I could feel depressed in that position and management not being able to see that or to acknowledge that because you don't see people with a sad face coming to the office, right? You just behind their desk and you maybe don't talk to them for a week because you have this one-to-one meeting every week. So it's very hard in that sense to be managed. So you have, I think if you are remote, and that's true if you are very young and junior, it's very hard to be managed in remote because you have to be very mature and mature enough to say, oh, by the way, I have this problem, but nobody's going to see that because you're alone behind your desk, right? And that's true also for management. For example, in Mergify, most of our engineers are senior, they're like 5-8 years of experience. So they're easy to manage in the sense that they're grown up, like they don't expect us to, come after us and see if everything's fine. If they have a problem, they're going to raise their hand and say, oh, by the way, I have a problem and say something over a meeting, over Slack, whatever, which is not true for junior engineers. And for example, at Red Hat, we saw that where basically it's very hard to hire junior engineers because most of the team I used to work in were full remotes. And it's very hard to mentor new engineers where you are remote because talking every day to them over IRC, Slack, or whatever makes it very hard to see if everything is fine. And they can be junior, feel ashamed of being stuck and just be stuck for 2 days behind their desk with a problem and just being blocked and waiting for something to happen. And you don't have this section that you can have in an office and just go to lunch and say, oh, by the way, this morning I was working on this. Do you have an idea on, yeah, sure, you should meet this guy or you should look at this. You don't have this conversation. They just don't happen. So if you have junior engineers, they're not going to have this conversation on their own because they don't know where the bar is. Like, where is it okay to reach people and disturb them? Like, hey, by the way, can I, knock on your door and ask you for help or I'm disturbing you and my friend is stupid. It's hard to assess that remotely, whereas you can just, say a word or two in a real life conversation and see how the other person reacts by looking at their face. So all these kind of social cues you don't have. So managing people or being managed is very hard. And it really depends on the level of seniorness that you have, basically.
And advice for new managers?
I think if you are a new manager managing a remote team, you really need to look, if you have junior people, really look very hard at how things are going, because like I was saying, they're not going to necessarily raise their hand and say, I have a problem, etc. So mentoring them is very important. One way of doing that might be, for example, having a buddy system where you find more senior engineer in the team and say, okay, you can just harass this person and ask them anything at any time. That's the rule. So you will never disturb them. You will never be a problem. So just ask anything. We do that, for example, for new people joining the team. They have a buddy. They can ask anything about the company itself, engineering problem, whatever. It's like free. There's no social problem being like, oh, maybe I should not ask. Maybe I will be seeing at them or whatever. So do something like that. Not with somebody that is a manager because you have this kind of hierarchy. You can, block people from asking. That might be a good way of solving this kind of problem. If you have more senior engineers or people to manage, I think that problem disappears a bit. People know what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. They're more autonomous, basically. Then the problem is like, how do you have this kind of more senior people work with the other people in the team and how do you connect everyone? especially if you have people that are a bit, introvert, all of that, which can stay a few days without talking to anyone over Slack. I mean, I've seen that, like just people working actually, but just not talking to anyone for 2 days or 3 days, which is very weird. Imagine going to an office and there's a guy working and he doesn't talk, like it's just like working. He's doing his job. It's not working. That's weird, right? So you have to feel that and organize anything. So we do things on site. If you can't do that, I think the goal as a manager is to animate the team, like do things so do party, do events, do whatever you can to build this sense of team, like always trying to build the team. And it takes a lot more effort than being in an office where you can just go, let's go grab a beer and that's it. For example, the thing we tried last year was we played a bit with Gather.town, which is kind of a 2D world where you can move things around. Very fun. Didn't work for the long term for us because people were not using. They built an escape game on that. And so we did that with the whole team, like solve the escape game for an hour, which was very fun. Was solving problems which are not the one we solve in our day-to-day activities. So it was very cool because you discover people on new angles and we discovered that the marketing guy could actually do math or I don't know, this kind of fun stuff where you can, for the whole team, we're a small team, so it's easy to do that with a cross team from everyone. But even if you have a team of engineers, you can just do things like that. Or even we do board games. There are board games online now for a couple of hours, the day and just, grab a drink and do that. It should be really part of your job to do that, to find an excuse for people to be together in either the same room, but at least in the same Zoom meeting and do something that's fun working, just so they're able to connect and to know each other and trust each other on other aspects than just coding, for example.
Some really useful, actionable advice there and some good food for thought. If people would like to continue the conversation, where do they find you?
I'm easy to find. Just type my name on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect and to have a chat. I'm also on Twitter where I'm less active, but I'm also there. So if you want to ask me any question, reach me out. Happy to answer.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. Julien, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you, Shane.